Good morning, fabulous people. A few minutes late today. Just had to locate my headphones. They disappeared and I couldn't find them. Who's out there today? I'll give it a couple of moments to see who is around and what's going on. But today is part of a 2-day session, I guess. We're breaking it up into two different parts. And the overriding topic, or the umbrella topic that we're going to talk about today, is anxiety. So the emphasis for today will be understanding the messages behind anxiety, and even more than that, really recognizing the connection that anxiety has, or the manifestation, I guess, that anxiety is, of your emotional intelligence. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the anatomy of anxiety. So there's a couple of different pathways that are activated in the brain that produce the experience of anxiety. And the reason that anxiety would be activated is quite different in both of those cases. The importance of understanding that is because the solution then is obviously really different as well. If you identify with anxiety or are challenged by anxiety, then both of these sessions are going to be really useful to you, because I think we can get into this cycle where we feel like we just want to be rid of it. Like it's something that can be so overwhelming and so debilitating, but the understanding behind it, once you really get on board with how anxiety arises and why, then you can really empower yourself to find a solution that's effective. And there are really effective solutions to anxiety out there. Hey Pam, oh yay, so lovely to see you. So I'd be really keen to hear what's going on for you guys, because if you have some specific questions in relation to anxiety, or are happy to share your own experiences with anxiety, then I can pick those out from the comments and talk about them specifically tomorrow. And if I'm able to weave those in today, then I'm more than happy to do that as well. Yay, Noreen, hi. US, Ireland, we're all over the place. Isn't the internet amazing? So today, let's get started with thinking about how anxiety is actually serving you. And the reason that I want to start with this is because I think that we can get into this mindset where we segregate emotions. We have the good camp, which is the more obvious emotions that we would want to be experiencing more of, like confidence, like joy, really anything which you can think of as being a positive emotion. And then we have the negative emotions, which exist on the other end of that scale, which is anxiety, fear, frustration, overwhelm, all of those typical emotions that we would group together as something that we would be seeking to avoid. What I want to introduce, or what I would like you to entertain, is actually the idea that all emotions are there to serve us. And it's only when we are unable to take the message from them and process them accordingly that we get stuck in these patterns where we take something that is essentially in flow and we make it solid. So we experience a chronic condition of that. Anxiety in its positive form is a mood state of fear, and fear is definitely not something we want to get rid of. Anxiety is not something we want to get rid of as well. What we want to make sure is happening is that we're taking the initial message of anxiety, taking the initial message of fear, arming ourselves with the skills to be able to deal with it effectively in the moment, and then, like I said, move through that process or move through that experience into a whole different mood setting, or into a whole different feeling, a better feeling state, if you like. One of the key things to realize is that unconsciously or subconsciously, you're never trying to cause yourself harm. So you're never working against yourself. Really, the feelings of fear or the feelings of anxiety are there because you're trying to protect yourself in some way. And fear, or the positive manifestation of fear and anxiety, really sharpens your focus. It really allows you to, it sharpens your instinct and it sharpens your intuition. So those three areas are heightened. You know, we have a heightened awareness of all of those things when we're in fear or when we're in anxiety. The problem, if you like, or the challenge arises when we are really flying over the top of anxiety, or we're trying to suppress it, or we're in a situation where we don't know how to manage it effectively. And so we get into this situation where the anxiety becomes chronic. And when the anxiety becomes chronic and we're not dealing with it in a really effective and empathetic way, then we get into this situation where it becomes unclear how anxiety is useful to us. It becomes unclear how it is we can take anything positive from this experience, and instead it just seems to come up randomly in all different moments, and it feels like a really out of control experience. Anxiety, the validity of anxiety is well, actually, let's not go there. What I was going to say is the truth, your thoughts are not always real. You know, we can create the physical experience of anxiety through having a series of unhelpful thoughts. And usually those thoughts are future focused, and we're focusing on the worst case scenario. When we focus on the worst case scenario in the future, so for instance, if it's in relation, let's use a really basic riding example. Let's say we're going out to ride and we're concerned about that. That's something that is causing us the feeling of anxiety. And so we have immediately this anticipation about what potentially might happen when we go out there and ride. Now, in the case of anticipation anxiety, that anticipation is obviously negative anticipation. We're projecting ourselves to a future space where we are seeing the worst case scenario come to life in our mind's eye, or something that we would really like to avoid. When we do that, we create a mental movie. We can see what's happening out there. So maybe we see our horse spooking, or maybe we see them behaving in a way that makes us feel really uncomfortable. Maybe we even see ourselves falling off. There's a audio that's attached to that. So how it is we're talking to ourselves, and we start to ask ourselves or tell ourselves really unhelpful questions like, oh my God, I don't want that to happen. Or what if this happens and I can't cope with it? Or what if such and such is watching? And then of course the feeling arises off the back of that. And the reason that the feeling arises, that feeling of anxiety, is created even though we're very separate to the actual experience that's causing us potential harm, is because we have given our subconscious or our unconscious mind enough information for it to believe it's real. Your subconscious or your unconscious mind can't tell the difference between what's real and imagined. And this is your greatest superpower and perhaps our biggest weakness as well. So when you feed enough sensory information to your unconscious mind, and the language of your unconscious or the language of your subconscious mind is sensory based, then it clocks that experience as happening right now in the present moment, and you experience the feeling of anxiety. What we also know on a neurological level or a brain level is that neurons that fire together wire together, meaning the more that you entertain and enter into anxious thoughts, the easier it is for you to default to those thought patterns, because it becomes the strongest thought pathway in your mind, if you can think about it that way. Every time you have a thought, be it positive or negative, it creates an impression. It creates a mental impression. I like to use the example of a wooden desk. So if you think about every time you have a thought, you are channeling a groove into the desk with your pen. And the same thought is you channeling on top of that same groove. So the more you think about something, the deeper that thought pathway becomes, that deeper that trench or channel becomes. And if you were to then get a marble and drop it onto the table, the course of action that it would take would be the one that is most easily available to it, the most practiced pathway. And so it makes sense that the marble would drop into that channel that's been created, because that's the most practiced thought. Is that thought real? Not necessarily. We can really engage or involve ourselves in what's called cognitive fusion, which is merging ourselves with our thoughts. We don't have a separation between what it is that we are thinking about and what it is that we're putting energy behind. And so the anxiety trap, I guess, is thinking constantly about thoughts which create anxiety, merging yourself into those thoughts, instead of having a distance that says, actually, is this something that is useful to me right now and supportive of where it is I want to take things? And then we create that channel. We start to really engage that pathway in a way that allows it to be easily activated and almost our default system. This is the unhealthy or unhelpful manifestation of anxiety. But if we were to step back from that, we can see that potentially along the way, we've ignored a number of warning signals on the dashboard of our car that have alerted us to the fact that something's wrong. Yesterday, I used an example, the car metaphor, where basically any emotional signal that we're getting is like a warning light on the dashboard. So anxiety in its first instance might be very subtle. You know, there might be this feeling of, it's kind of like alerting you to a situation that something has changed. And that's actually a really positive manifestation of anxiety as well. It gives us the ability to decide and respond to different environments. When we are in a healthy relationship with anxiety and a healthy relationship with fear, we're able to utilize that information and decide what the most constructive way forward is. And this is where the partnership between our logical intelligence and our emotional intelligence and our physical intelligence becomes really important. We can see that we have scanned our environment to decide what it means for us. And this is something that our unconscious mind is doing all the time. It makes assessments about what's coming in the future. Your cortex, which is one of the parts of your brain responsible for higher thought, it's also your language center and it's your anticipation center. So if you are scanning your environment and making a decision unconsciously about what it means to you, your thalamus at that point has taken in all different pieces of information from your environment, and it sends that information to your cortex. Your cortex then makes assessments about what's possible. It's the anticipation center. It makes assessments about what's possible, and then you decide, in a healthy functioning system, you decide the best course of action, you make a logical assessment about it, and you action it physically. So you can see how we've received this sensory information, we've made an emotional assessment, we've logically decided what's gone on, and then we physically, tangibly take action. When these things are off guard, we get stuck in a thought loop. When they're not working well, rather, we get stuck in a thought loop. So the same thing happens. We receive all of this sensory information. It goes to our cortex. And instead of our cortex sending out a variety of different scenarios for us to choose and make assessments about, we get stuck. And we constantly think, this could happen, 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 this could happen. And instead of taking one of those situations and actioning it or making a logical assessment about what's needed, we ruminate and we worry and we get caught in self-doubt and we start this anticipation anxiety which feeds on itself. In the first instance, that information is useful to us. We can decide whether this is a situation which is necessary for us to be concerned about. Do we need to upskill? For instance, if you're in a situation where your horse is presenting you with a challenge which you feel your level of competency is ill-equipped to deal with, there's an issue there. There's a disparity there. And that's something that doesn't want to be blundered through or ignored because you could get yourself hurt or your horse could get hurt. And so using anxiety in that instance tells you, actually, I'm really not comfortable here for valid reason. It's not the end of the road, and it doesn't mean you need to get stuck in that cycle. But the next point of that is to make constructive assessments about how to move forward. How can I learn more? What help do I need? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to do to get moving forward? This is where our intelligences start to work together and we can use them to really positive benefit. When we're stuck or we've lost the ability to really check in with ourselves and make an assessment about what an emotion is telling us, or when we've lost that intuitive understanding that our gut is feeding information to our mind and we're like pushing it down and ignoring it because we've rationalized or talked ourselves out of a situation which actually we're really uncomfortable with. Then we get into these thought loops where we feel stuck and we get overwhelmed. We fuse ourselves with the experience of anxiety. And instead of being someone that is actually in that experience, we are an anxious person or we are an anxious rider. As soon as that fusion happens, you remove yourself from the ability to action a solution. Because if you are intrinsically anxious, if that is just your lot, if this is how it is for you in your riding now, you can see that any solution would be a waste of time because that's just your intrinsic makeup. So separating yourself out and going, even if I've got myself into a situation right now where for a long time I've felt anxious and that's almost become the modus operandi from me, what I need to practice is that separation so that I gift myself with the ability to resensitize myself to anxiety, actually, to recognize that most probably I'm not feeling anxious 100% of the time, and then to say, well, what is it that sparks that feeling? What is it that I need to take from that I can actually make an assessment about and use to my constructive benefit and really to the benefit of my horses as well. Good morning. Let me have a look. There's some awesome comments. I saw them pop up, but I was deliberately blocking them out because I have like a shiny object syndrome and I can be distracted off to the side. So I wanted to keep with the stream of thought. Hi, Elo. Hi, Susie. Hi, Ginger. Oh, very cool. Really, the two negative manifestations or the two negative ways that we deal with anxiety are the two ways that we deal unhealthily with any emotion. It's suppression, so pushing it down, pretending it's not there, cultivating that facade of okayness and calmness, or overexpression where we're just like zinging on the outside and we feel like we're completely out of control with that experience. So yesterday I wrote a blog on congruence, on emotional congruence and the importance of that. And I talked about it or touched a little bit on it in yesterday's live session as well. Anxiety is something that I would say occupies 90% of the conversations that I have with riders. And if you are experiencing anxiety and feel like you're the only one, you are so far from the only one. This is a really common challenge to face, and I know that it can be a really crappy one, but there are solutions available. So the biggest thing you can do is actually decide that help is possible, that change is possible, and then grab really whatever help is available to you. In Joyride, my membership program, I have a whole pathway dedicated to this, talking about the exact stuff we're talking about now, talking about the stuff we're going to be talking about tomorrow, which is the different manifestations and the different ways that anxiety arises. And once you've identified where you fall into, and sometimes you fall into both camps, then you can really action an effective solution, just like in any situation. So what else is it that I want to touch on here? We are going to go a lot into it tomorrow, and I'm conscious of not taking up too much of your time, but I think this is a really important topic. And saying sometimes the excitement of showing turns to anxiety and I can't tell the difference. It's really interesting because the physical symptoms or the physical expression of anxiety and excitement are the same. If you were to describe to me how it is you feel when you're anxious, you would say, well, my heart rate increases, I get kind of a tight feeling in my chest, I feel my body temperature increase, my palms might get sweaty, maybe you get a bit flushed. We have different variables of how anxiety shows up for us physically, but they all move within the same kind of context. If I was then to ask you, well, how does it feel to be really excited? The same thing would come up. Well, I feel kind of like my heart rate increases. I feel a bit flushed. I feel like my temperature goes up, like the palms of my hands are sweaty. So then what is the difference between anxiety and excitement? It's context. It's the context or the framework that you are viewing the situation from. In the case of competition, it's easy for us to turn a situation that is exciting in the first instance into an anxious one just by the narrative that we are talking to ourselves with, just by the conversations that we're having with ourselves. I think that's better English. And the reason for that is it's possible to talk yourself into the experience of anxiety just by starting with one of the arms of any emotional state. So at any given time, your mood state is primarily defined by your focus, by your self-talk. And self-talk is different from mind chatter. Self-talk is intentional conversation that you're having with yourself and your physiology. So in the case of anxiety, your focus is, in the case of anticipation anxiety, because there is another form of anxiety, in the case of anticipation anxiety, your focus needs to be future focused and it needs to be on something happening that you don't want to happen. So you have a whole visual of what that looks like in your mind's eye. The self-talk component is that disempowering question context that I was talking about before. So why is this happening? I don't want this to happen. I'd really rather not put myself in that situation. And physiologically, the feeling of anxiety and the physical manifestation of anxiety happens off the back of that. You can alter your mood by altering any one of those three arms. In the case of changing excitement to anxiety, you can start with the physiological experience of excitement and the mental experience of excitement. And then if you start to question or doubt or ruminate too much on different possible situations, you can obviously transform that into an anxious experience, just like we're able to really flip between mood states. It's a really important observation, actually. You can be having a really crappy day and someone rings you up and you have a good laugh and you feel like your mood's completely shifted in the matter of a minute. We can shift moods like shapeshifters. That's our gift. And the importance is just of realizing just as easily as you can move from a slightly more positive state towards a negative state, you can do the reverse, but it becomes a much more practiced phenomenon, because in the midst of something which has a lot of energy, and generally those negative states have a lot of energy, it takes quite a big shift to move yourself to the side. So this is where the practice process of managing your emotions and being in control of your emotional state is really important. Identifying in the day-to-day when a framework or when a mood state is serving you, how it is that you are actually participating in that process to create that mood, and then deciding what the most constructive or beneficial way is to move forward. We can get in situations where we are addicted to emotions as well. This is really obvious, or one of the most obvious examples of this is at competition again, where quite often when I work with riders, we get to this place where the nerves and the anxiety aren't prevalent anymore. It's just not how they are. However, their previous identity as a competitive rider was one who was nervous or one who was anxious. And so you go along to the show or the competition and you feel really good. And then all of a sudden you realize that you feel really good. And that's different to the experiences that you've had before. And that creates concern, because it feels like, well, maybe if I'm not feeling anxious, I'm going to miss something which I should be anxious about. And this is the addictive cycle of any emotion, but especially fear and anxiety. You can get yourself into a situation where where biochemically you've got so used to the experience of anxiety, it feels unsafe not to be feeling anxious. It feels like your anxiety is your awareness, your beacon that's searching out all possible situations all the time. And if that's turned off or dulled for some reason, we feel unsupported and unsafe. Realizing that you are able to have a healthy relationship with fear, a healthy relationship with anxiety, which is that finely tuned focus, which is that instinct and that intuition that's serving you, and that you don't have to be in this chronic feeling state of anxiety or this chronic feeling state of fear in order to realize or to benefit from it, is really crucial, because then you allow yourself to feel good. We get addicted to these ways of feeling. We get, and we become reliant on them. So understanding how that process works is really important as well, in order to be able to break the bonds that essentially cause us to repeat experiences of the past. And that emotional addiction is a really huge part of that cycle, a really huge part of that process. I think that's probably quite a lot to take on board for today. I'm really, really keen, like I said earlier, to hear how anxiety is showing up for you, and if you're experiencing some really specific challenges in your riding with anxiety or fear. And tomorrow I can pick through and have a look at those and see where we're at. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out. It's really cool to be able to have these conversations. I know that it seems quite salesy to do this, but if you are wanting some help, really, I really encourage you to come and check out Joyride, because like I say, this is something so common, and it honestly breaks my heart to have endless conversations with riders who are in this place where they're actually feeling like sometimes they're going to throw the towel in, like they're going to give up. And there are solutions out there, if not with me, with someone else. So please seek them out and really empower yourself to create change, because it's not something that you have to suffer with endlessly. You know, this is any situation that's related to fear or frustration or anxiety. All of these things are really workable, and we need to get you to a place where you feel empowered to be able to help yourself and help your horse, because there's so much available to you. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to actually get you to a good place, and with a whole host of empathetic people who really understand what it's like. For me, my default used to be anxiety. And I know that if I get a little bit off kilter, like if I'm overtired or things get too much, that's my default. I don't get angry, I don't get frustrated, I get anxious within myself. But there's a recognition now, a trained recognition of what's happening, and I can actually talk myself out of that experience. And I know many others out there are the same. So, yeah, really cool. But this time tomorrow, we'll talk about the anatomy of anxiety. We're going to break down looking at when it is a thought process that's giving rise to the feeling and when it is a result of an emotional trigger or memory. And that second scenario, the emotional trigger or memory, is very likely in cases where you've had injury or some kind of upset that has caused you to relate a specific situation or scenario to the need to be afraid or concerned. So, yeah, really interesting discussion. Okay, guys, hit me with your questions and I can follow through on them tomorrow or answer them in the comments if that seems applicable. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.